All right, our next interviewee we're going to bring out now. Growing up on a wheat farm just outside of Harper, Kansas, our next interviewee has quite a story to tell. It involves a dark stretch of highway, a very bold prayer, and a life-altering situation. She says it's the slowed, hazy in-between where we get to know God better and trust Him more. Ladies, please welcome Lori Ann Wood. Okay, so I was trying to come up with your fun question. Okay. And so you said that you and your husband are both CPAs, and you taught business at the university level, business classes. Yeah. But I read your book, and which I love, and you're a very, very eloquent writer. So obviously, you always wanted to be a writer, and that was your dream.
Well, I'm glad you broke the news to him that I am an accountant, and so don't leave or go to sleep. I did teach it for a long time, but I think a lot of us can relate to this. I felt like I had a book inside me, and I didn't know what it was going to be. I thought, maybe it'll be about how to throw a really good children's theme party or how to vacation on the cheap. Because I was good at those two things, and I was waiting to be an expert at something. And so I lived most of my life in that left part of my brain. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, that right brain started to come alive, and I realized the book that God had intended all my life for me to write.
I love that. I love a little serendipitous.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm so excited to get into this next question. I started reading your book, and I love the introduction, the very first paragraph, but what I would love is if you yourself could read that to us before we begin.
Sure. Yeah. Every life experiences a moment when the story breaks into two pieces, pre-tragedy and post-tragedy, when there suddenly becomes a before and an after, when the carefully planned journey takes a decided detour. This was mine.
I love that. I think that's something every one of us can relate to, are the detours. So this year we're focusing on prayer, and you said a very bold prayer on a dark stretch of highway, November 6, 2015 at 10 p.m. Can you tell us what led up to the prayer and what it was about?
Yes, I don't remember if it was exactly 10 p.m., but I do remember the place in the highway that we were. We had just been to Abilene with our youngest child for a college visit, and we were on our way home. And it was typical scenario. My husband was driving. It was dark. Our daughter was asleep in the back seat, and I was reading a book with my little book light, and then I finished my book, and I remember putting it down and watching the highway go by outside my window. And although I knew that we were about to be empty nesters, I just had this strong conviction that I had an empty next, like N-E-X-T. And I just had this strong compulsion that God had something for me. I didn't know what it was, but I wanted to be all in for it. I wanted to be all about it. And I just prayed a prayer which was really uncharacteristic for me, but I just prayed, I don't know, God, what you have next for me. Maybe I'll go back to school and do something I like better than accounting, or start a business. I didn't know, but I was excited about it. And I said, I'm all in, God. Whatever the next chapter you have for me, I'm all in. And then 3 weeks later, I got a diagnosis of a life-limiting disease.
Okay, so in your intro, you mentioned pre-tragedy and post-tragedy. So now that you are post-detour, how do you stay positive on those days when the cloud of reality hovers?
Yeah, well, I've got 2 life hacks for that. And this is whether, you have a chronic illness or something health-wise, or whether you're just living life this side of eternity. I think one of them is a physical hack, and that is that we were coming home from a vacation, and we'd stayed too long, and one of the limitations I have is energy. And we had just stayed way, way too long on this vacation, but we decided to go to this zoo at the end of it for some reason. And I remember walking around that zoo, and I was just so ready to be home. And we walked by this creature, and I didn't know what it was. It looked like its hair was falling off, and it was haggard, and its head was hung really low. And I looked at the little nameplate, and it said muskox. And apologies to all the muskox out there. I'm sure they're very nice creatures, but that's how I felt at the time. And so the hack that I have is when I'm having a bad day, my doctor told me a long time ago that I'd have good days and bad days, and we all have good days and bad days. I don't have to explain anything to my husband or anybody around me. I just say I'm having a muskox day. And they know what that means, and I don't have to go through it. So that's one hack that I have. The other hack that I have is more of a spiritual one. And for me, when things are really going off the rails, and when you're on that detour and it never seems to end, I sometimes can just find myself pulling back from God, pulling back from study, pulling back from words. And I've learned that in that temporary time where you're just trying to make it through, it's okay to borrow words. And by that, I mean it's okay to borrow words out of Scripture for prayer. It's okay to even borrow words from trusted Christian authors or blogs or podcasts, because I found that on my worst days, sometimes Scripture was too rich for me to get into. And one of the strangest ones maybe is that when my heart was completely broken, the words that could seep in there were the words of contemporary Christian music. And if that's all you can do at that moment in your life is just to hang on and borrow those words from some source, then that's enough for that day.
I love that. What has been your biggest surprise on this journey?
I think my biggest surprise maybe is that all my life I've kind of avoided detours, whether it was on a road or in life. And maybe you guys are like that too. We set our GPS on our phone or in our car, and we know the fastest, the smoothest, the most efficient, maybe with no tolls or whatever it is you put. But that's the way you want to go. That's the journey that you want to take. And then we get to a point in life or on the highway where we can't go forward on that road that we had chosen anymore. And I always thought that detour that we get thrown off on is this inconvenience, and it's bumpy, and it's not pretty, and it's out of the way. But I've started to learn that detour is actually a road that makes a way when there is no other way. And that's true in your life. When you get detoured, you're getting put into a way that's making a way for you when there wasn't a way when you were on the road that you had chosen. And so you can reframe those detours into a way that's making a way instead of just an inconvenience.
Okay, your final question in 1 minute or less. Can you tell us, knowing what you know now, would you still pray that prayer the exact same way?
I would, because like I talked about on the detour, I would have fought against that my whole life. And I don't think I would have ever learned that detour is something that I needed, because God needed to get my attention from it, and I needed that strengthening in my faith. We wouldn't choose it. I wouldn't choose a detour. We don't program it into our GPS. But when we look back at it, sometimes it makes a lot more sense than when we're looking forward at it.
Absolutely. Well, Lori, thank you so much for being here this weekend and especially tonight. And we'll get to hear her full story tomorrow when she presents for us, and we'll get to hear you twice, I think. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.